Hello, it's John Heaton, and today I'm going to tell you the story about how I was lucky enough to meet Yoko Ono here in Budapest in 1998. So the story is, I came across this art gallery in Budapest which was actually called Yoko Ono, so I was a bit intrigued by this, so I went inside and they were showing an exhibition of Lennon art prints. And so I thought, oh, this is interesting, and I can't remember if I came back or if I took, I think even on the off chance I did take along my collection of Yoko Ono records just in case the gallery was connected with Yoko in any way. So I had this plastic bag full of vinyl with me when I went into the exhibition. So I was looking around these prints, which were all for charity, and I spotted Sam Havantoy, who was Yoko's Hungarian-American partner at the time. I'd seen his picture in some books, Lennon books, and so I recognised him. So I went up to him and I said, is Yoko still here in Budapest? Figuring out that this gallery must indeed have been connected with Yoko herself. And he said, no, she's just gone back to New York. And I said, oh, that's a pity, I've got this bag of Yoko records that I wanted her to sign. And he looked inside the bag and said, oh my God, a Yoko freak in Budapest. He said, I'll tell you what, if you can get your company to buy one of these prints for charity, you can come to lunch with Yoko in May. So I said, okay. So I went back to my company and went to the charity director and the guy in charge of the charity budget and put the proposal to him. And luckily enough, it was early enough in the year and he agreed. Still had a budget for it. So I went ahead and purchased a Lennon print for the company and phoned the number that Sam had given me and told him that I'd done this. He said, okay, I'll call you when we come to Budapest. So a couple of months later, he was good to his word. He called me and said, come over to this and that address at 7 o'clock on Sunday evening and you can meet Yoko. And I said, okay, great. Can I bring some records to have her sign? He goes, bring anything you want. So I promptly got all of my Lennon records, all of my Yoko records. It didn't all fit in one bag. I mean, there was literally 10 or 15 of them. And went round, rang on the doorbell, was let in by Sam, ushered into the sitting room, told to take off my shoes first, by the way, Japanese custom. A bit embarrassing because I had a hole in one of my socks, so that was pretty obvious for all to see, so that was a bit embarrassing. Anyway, ushered into the sitting room, big white leather sofa. Yoko was just sitting on it. I was told to sit next to her. And then Sam showed my wife around the flat while I just passed her album after album. And she signed every single one of them to John and Kathleen, Love Yoko, Budapest, 98. She was very patient. She just sat there, and as she went through each album, I pointed out which was my favourite track. I think she was quite pleased that I actually had some Yoko records, because I'm a completist. I got all the Yoko records. I paid some pretty serious money for some of these 70s Yoko albums, because they're not that easy to come by. So for example, on this one I said my favourite track is Men, 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 which is the last track on side 2, I think. This album I didn't really have a favourite, so I didn't tell her what my favourite was. And neither this one, by the way. Season of Glass, I told her that Goodbye Sadness was my favourite. And in fact I told her that album was my favourite. And where is it? Here it is behind me, signed by Yoko. So having got her to sign all of those, and I showed you the White Album at the beginning, I think, and all of my Lennon ones, this is sometime in New York City, I imagine is up there, you can't see it probably. So having signed everything, we then sat there, I was given a couple of beers to drink and we just chatted about anything we wanted to chat about. And then after 2 hours in the flat, we went to the restaurant across the road and had dinner together, and this is just the four of us, and so all in all I spent 4 hours with Yoko Ono. So for 4 hours I was allowed to ask any questions I wanted. I wasn't told you shouldn't ask about John or Paul or Beatles or any subject. So because I wasn't told anything, I asked practically everything I could think of. And at some stage in the evening, I pointed out in no uncertain fashion that I didn't have a favourite Beatle, because I don't. And I said that Paul McCartney was every bit as talented as John Lennon, and George Harrison was up there as well. And I think she was a bit surprised to hear that, because most people are probably sycophantic and just say to her, John's great and Paul's rubbish. But I didn't. And I also said that when she and Paul argue, or when John and Paul used to argue, it's quite upsetting for Beatles fans, because we kind of treat it as one big family, and we don't like it when the family members are bickering. And I also told her that I attended her recent show in London, which was on Tottenham Court Road, I remember, and also was a big fan of Ringo's records as well. So it was an interesting conversation. She actually admitted she didn't know, for example, Paul's solo work, like Band on the Run, she wasn't even familiar with, which was quite surprising. And even more surprising, she wasn't familiar with Pussycats, the album that John produced for Harry Nilsson, which I was quite frankly staggered by, but I guess it was recorded in the Lost Weekend, the so-called Lost Weekend, sorry, which so maybe Yoko wasn't too keen to discover that one. I remember also enthusing about Tony Levine's bass playing on Double Fantasy, and she rather interestingly said that Tony Levine was, out of all the band members, was the one who was the nicest to her and treated her as a musical equal, etc., etc. So that was nice to hear. I remember complimenting her on Sisters Oh Sisters off this album, and she said, yeah, well, I've got Phil Spector to thank for that one, because he did a great job on the production. What else do I remember? I remember enthusing about Earl Slick's solo on Silver Horse from this album, and she laughed at that and said, you're quite a musician, aren't you? Because I used to talk about the bass parts and the guitar solos and stuff. And at one stage in the evening, she actually did say, it's very interesting to meet you. So, not in that accent, it sounds like the bloody Queen of England. But anyway, I remember her also saying that regarding Paul's first solo album, McCartney, why does he play all the instruments? What was he trying to prove? And I said, Yoko, the only reason Paul played all the instruments, as he said in his interview at the time, is because he was having a better time with Linda than he was with the other Beatles. Simple as that. I wouldn't read anything too heavy into it. Like, John was claiming that Paul was trying to be the Beatles by releasing a solo album, playing everything. That's just garbage. So it was a very interesting meeting. And unfortunately, I didn't get a photo taken with her, but I did get about 15 autographs, so that was good. And then later in the year, I had the opportunity to have another dinner with her when her box set, Revelations, I think it was called, came out. So another 2 or 3 hours of good conversation. So I've given you the highlights. There's probably more if I can dredge them out of my memory, but it was 2 memorable evenings. I'm really pleased to have met her. I like to think she remembers this mad English Beatle stroke Lennon Yoko fan in Budapest. So thanks for watching, and see you next time.